Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to Cheating Stories Best so you don't miss any of our latest tales. Today's story is one of betrayal, friendship, and a dramatic escape plan. Enjoy. There was nothing youthful about us, except for our actions. 3 grown men were acting like a bunch of teenagers, caught in a situation that was as bad as it was bewildering. We did our best to keep the bitterness and vindictiveness at bay. It's easy to spiral into anger and resentment when your wife cheats on you, but it takes real self-control not to let it consume you. As long as the 3 of us stuck together, we had the support we needed to get through it. So, which of our wives cheated? The short answer is all of them. This all unfolded within 6 months. My wife, Loretta, jumped into action, easily convincing Da and Colleen to join her. By the time the 3 of us realized what was happening, it was too late to save any of our marriages. None of us were interested in trying. We had already moved on from the idea of salvaging anything. Tonight, everything fell into place. Surprisingly, none of the wives suspected that we knew what was going on. We'd spent the past month preparing, and we were genuinely excited about what was next. Woody, Terry, and I had grown up together in Waldorf, where we had initially planned to retire. But our plans changed dramatically when our wives went off the rails. Tomorrow, we were off to start a new chapter in Canada, and tonight was supposed to be our last hurrah, a childish, yet fitting, farewell to our old lives. Why childish? Because what we planned was indeed a bit juvenile and certainly inappropriate, but it felt like a preferable alternative to cruelty and vindictiveness. It was Terry's idea to move to Canada. We had gone fishing there every summer and often talked about how wonderful it would be to live there permanently. Of course, at that time, we were all married with children. My daughters had married and moved away, Terry's son was in the Air Force, and Woody's 2 sons were in college, with his 17-year-old daughter, Caitlin, still living at home. Caitlin was initially a potential problem. However, once Woody discovered that she was aware of her mother's infidelities and had threatened to leave if Woody didn't take action, things changed. So, the 3 of us, along with Caitlin, set off for Canada. The transition was challenging, but we agreed that we could make it work. Terry was our chef, a role he had embraced without formal education but with plenty of hands-on experience. For the past decade, he and his wife, Dora, had owned a small family restaurant. Terry had sold it last week without Dora's knowledge, walking away with $100,000 in cash. When combined with the money he had withdrawn from the bank and cashed out from insurance policies, we had a solid financial foundation. Woody owned an auto repair shop with his brother, Len, who had long sought to buy Woody's share. Woody had managed to sell his portion of the business and his 1964 Corvette, adding another $100,000 to our pool. He had also cleaned out his bank accounts, contributing significantly to our startup capital. As for me, I was the only one with a college degree. While I didn't own a business like the others, I had accumulated over $250,000 through smart investments and a solid salary as an electrical engineer. Even in a volatile market, I had managed to hold my ground. After tidying up my affairs, I brought about $1 million to the table. Our initial goal had been to purchase a fishing lodge, but we ended up settling on one that allowed for car access. The property cost nearly $500,000, but we were content. We had enough cash left over to support ourselves for at least 4 years, and if things went well, we might even make a profit. Tomorrow morning, 3 cars full of our belongings would head out for our new lives in the northern woods. It sounded as thrilling as Little House on the Prairie, but it was our escape plan. Loretta worked in the claims department of a major insurance company and had become close with her boss, Raymond. To meet him in the evenings, she persuaded Dora and Colleen to cover for her, and the 3 of them would go out for dinner or attend social events. Loretta used these opportunities to visit Raymond at his house. This routine continued for a couple of months until Raymond arranged a date with Loretta. The girls didn't want to leave Dora unattended, so they arranged for a permanent chaperone for her. Consequently, every Wednesday night, the three ladies would hang out while the guys played poker. The three women and their lovers spent time at Raymond's country house, while we were left to deal with the fallout. This was just one chapter in our complicated lives. The truth had revealed itself, and now, we were ready to embrace a new beginning, leaving behind the betrayals and heartbreak of our pasts. We never found out if any trades or exchanges took place, but it didn't seem to matter much. Woody had chosen the Holiday Inn as our meeting spot, and we waited at home until the wives had left for their evening walk. For some reason, each of them arrived in their own cars, which seemed like a precaution in case someone wanted to leave early or stay late. Caitlin wasn't thrilled about waiting for us at the motel, but taking her along wasn't an option. We weren't planning anything too complex, but there was still a risk of complications. Woody and Terry decided to head straight to the Holiday Inn together, while I planned to see Loretta one last time before heading out. I took my car, noting that 6 vehicles were parked outside the house. It looked like everyone was driving separately. About half an hour after my arrival, I noticed lights flickering on and off in several bedrooms. With the house surveyed a week prior, I knew exactly where the electrical service box was located. The main panel was outside, just above the meter, while the individual switches were inside. Terry and Woody were busy preparing smoke bombs. Terry had built 10 using PVC pipe, filled with saltpeter and sugar. The bombs had been tested and were expected to burn for 20 to 30 minutes each. As I climbed into the house, Terry and Woody split up. Terry took the front while Woody went around back. Once I saw the first wisp of white smoke, I flipped the main power switch, cutting off the electricity. By the time I made it back to the car, all 10 smoke bombs were in full effect. The house was shrouded in thick smoke, with a mix of white, orange, and red plumes. On the drive home, I used my phone to call 2 local television stations, ensuring the incident would get coverage. An hour later, I heard a car door slam outside the house. Loretta looked startled as she walked in and saw me sitting in front of the TV with a warm beer, having held it in my hand for the last half hour. "How was your evening, dear?" she asked, setting down her purse and kicking off her shoes. "I had to take a taxi home," she said. "The car had a flat tire." "Why didn't you call me?" I asked. "There was no answer," she replied. "Do you want me to go pick up your car?" "No, I'll take care of it in the morning. I'm tired and need a shower. I want to go to bed." "Loretta, where are the diamond earrings you were wearing when you left?" I asked. Her hand instinctively went to her ear, and her mouth opened slightly. I expected her to say they were in her purse, but she said nothing. "Let me guess," I continued, "you took them off so you wouldn't lose them in bed and left them on the nightstand when the lights went out. You forgot them in your rush to leave." She looked at me, puzzled. "How did you know the lights went out?" I held up the main switch I had removed from the electrical box. "Oh God, no. Were you there?" I smiled and got up from the chair. I wasn't alone. Terry and Woody were with me, I continued. "We'll be leaving in the morning. We bought a shrimp boat in Bale, Alabama. I hope you and Raymond will be very happy." "John, wait. Don't go. Can we talk?" she pleaded. I slammed the door behind me and walked to the car. As I passed the upright house on the way to the motel, I saw a couple of police cars and 4 tow trucks trying to clear the vehicles from the scene. I parked down the street and walked into the garage. No one stopped me. The house was dark and empty. Using a mini flashlight, I checked the bedrooms. In the second bedroom, I found a pair of diamond earrings and both of Loretta's engagement rings. It was intriguing to me that she had removed her rings before committing adultery. 10 minutes later, I arrived at the Holiday Inn. Loretta had called the other wives, and according to Terry, Dora was in tears, desperately trying to make sense of everything. The morning began with a frantic phone call from Loretta, her voice breaking into hysterics. Woody was too overwhelmed to make sense of her words and ended up switching off his phone in frustration. Meanwhile, Colleen took a more measured approach, simply demanding that Woody come home immediately to explain himself. Woody turned off his phone as well, avoiding her requests. With a mix of urgency and resignation, we booked a single room with 2 double beds for the night. Caitlin wasn't thrilled about sharing a room with 3 men, but it was a last-minute arrangement, and she had to cope. We settled into our beds fully clothed and hit the road at 5 a.m., eager to escape the chaos. By the next evening, we had a reservation in Plattsburgh, and Woody had promised Caitlin her own room. We'd been driving for about 5 hours when my cell phone rang. I'd forgotten to turn it off. The caller ID displayed my eldest daughter, Sarah. "Dad, this is Sarah. What's going on between you and Mom? Is she there?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. "Yes, she's here, and she's desperate. She says you won't let her explain anything," I replied. "Did she explain anything to you?" Sarah inquired. "No, she only said you were being unreasonable and unfair. That's all I got," I said. "Sarah, do me a favor, check if Mom is wearing her wedding rings," I asked. There was a brief silence. "No, she's not wearing them." "What does that mean?" Sarah's voice trembled with confusion. "Ask her where her rings are," I instructed. After some muffled sounds, Sarah came back on the line. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" I asked about her rings, and she burst into tears and ran out of the house. She drove away, but I didn't recognize the car she was in. "When Mom is ready to explain what happened, I'll talk to you. Until then, I don't have much to say. I'll visit her house later today." I ended the call and turned off my phone, feeling a mix of frustration and resignation. At noon, each of the wives would be served with divorce papers. Raymond Upright, who had been involved with Loretta, would receive his papers as well. Carl Wilcox and Dennis Roswell were also on the list. Our mutual lawyer, Seymour Schlump, had promised to keep us updated if he could. Seymour was an old friend who was eager to support our efforts, not as revenge but as a means of escaping the turmoil. 2 days later, we arrived at our new home in Canada. We hoped our wives would think we had gone to Alabama, making it easier to avoid detection. Terry was thrilled with the new kitchen in the lodge, his latest venture. The lodge had been closed for 2 weeks to allow us to settle in, and during this time, several former employees visited. Woody was busy with maintaining the boat engines and the lodge's generators, leaving him little free time. Caitlin agreed to wait tables and help with household chores, but since she wasn't a co-owner, she expected to be paid. By the time our first guests arrived, everything was in place. Terry had planned the menu and stocked the pantry, while Woody fine-tuned all the boat motors. The general management of the lodge fell to me, a challenge I relished. I also worked on improving the lodge's website, knowing that a better online presence would help keep the rooms occupied. Fall approached, and we knew we would need to cater to guests interested in hunting or other activities. We decided to tackle that challenge when it arose, focusing on getting the lodge up and running smoothly. At home, the situation was less ideal. Seymour called with the latest updates. Dee was the only one of the wives to sign and return the divorce papers. Although she didn't want the divorce, she felt pressured to comply with Terry's demands. She became a recluse, staying home and refusing to communicate with anyone. Colleen and Dennis Roswell had vanished, making it impossible for Seymour to serve them with papers. The worst news came last. Loretta refused to sign the divorce papers, and Raymond Upright had moved into our house. So much for her repentance. I found myself increasingly useless at the lodge in the days that followed. Woody and Terry were adamant that I go home and sort things out. They insisted that I couldn't wait until morning and needed to take immediate action. Unable to ignore their advice, I woke up in the middle of the night and drove south. It wasn't fair to the guys if I didn't play my part. I had to fix this mess. Halfway through my drive, self-doubt crept in. I wasn't a marathon runner, and my energy was waning. I stopped at a small motel and called Seymour. I instructed him to sue Continental Paragon for $1 million, with a settlement clause that would drop the lawsuit if they fired both Loretta and Raymond. Seymour hesitated, knowing they'd likely opt for the cheaper route and that he would lose a big payday. I told him to bill me for his time and to hand over the paperwork by noon the next day. I got up early, eager to complete my mission. By 8 a.m., I was parked across the street from the house, out of sight. 10 minutes later, the garage door opened, and Loretta and Raymond drove off to work together. It seemed so natural, and it made my blood boil. It was time for some youthful mischief. I headed to Kroger, buying half a dozen cans of red beets and a pack of rubber gloves. By the time I arrived at my favorite Eastern market, it was open. My purchases included 5 kilograms of what's known as stinky tofu, 5 packages of frozen fish, commonly called skinny because it smelled terrible and was used as bait, and a couple of durian fruits, which are infamous for their foul odor. I was confident I could use these to make a strong statement. 30 minutes later, I returned to my old house. I estimated I had about 3 hours to complete my tasks. The first step was to use the skinny before it thawed. Armed with a regular screwdriver, I removed the covers from every electrical switch and outlet, tossing a piece of fish behind each one. Each room took about 10 minutes to complete. After an hour and a half, I ran out of fish. Next, I tackled the stinky tofu. It was soft and mushy, spreading like butter. I applied it to the top and bottom of mattresses and on all furniture cushions. The smell permeated the fabric and was impossible to remove. I used a kitchen knife to cut the durian into pieces. The odor was horrendous. I stuffed pieces into each heating and air conditioning duct throughout the house. After inspecting my work, I carefully reassembled all the electrical appliances to obscure the source of the smell. Satisfied with my handiwork, I sprinkled red beet juice on every carpet. No stain remover could get rid of that. Before leaving, I went into the garage and opened the breaker panel. I removed each switch, including the main one, and used my screwdriver to unscrew each connection. It was a nightmare for any electrician, especially since I took the panel and switches with me. My work here was done. The house would soon be engulfed in chaos. I felt compelled to stop and see Dora on my way back. She let me into her house and offered me coffee, which I accepted out of courtesy. She asked about Terry but didn't inquire about anything else. We sat in silence until I finished my coffee. I asked if there was anything I could do for her. Dora broke down in tears and left the room. As I approached the door, she called out to me, "John, tell him for me, please." "Tell him." "Tell him what?" she returned, crying harder. It was hard to understand her. "I didn't sleep with him," Dora said through her sobs. "Tell Terry I didn't sleep with Carl. I did some other things, but not that. He kept harassing me, and I had to do something to make him stop. I didn't even want to be there. Colleen and Loretta made me go. They thought if I went along too, I wouldn't say anything. I felt trapped. Please, John, tell Terry I didn't sleep with him. I love Terry and regret letting Colleen and Loretta convince me. I don't know what to do. Help me." Her genuine remorse was evident, but she seemed lost on how to make things right. I felt worse than before I came. I nodded, assuring her I understood, and left her house. Before heading back, I stopped to see Sarah. She no longer spoke to her mother, Loretta. Although Loretta hadn't told her what happened, Sarah had somehow found out. The tension was palpable, and Sarah's silence spoke volumes about the damage that had been done. When I confronted Loretta, it quickly turned into a heated argument that neither of us was prepared to resolve. It was another mess in a series of disasters. As I was nearing Plattsburgh, my cell phone rang. It was Loretta. Apparently, Sarah had given her my number. "John, you son of a, what the hell have you done?" Loretta's voice crackled with anger. Can you be a bit more specific? I asked, trying to remain calm. I was fired today. They said they either had to fire me or go to court. Your name came up. Her voice trembled with frustration. I'm truly sorry to hear that, dear, I said, struggling to keep my tone sympathetic. I was hoping they'd just settle with $1 million. Looks like we both lost. Loretta's anger was palpable. That's not all. When I got home, the house was a disaster. There was no electricity, and the smell was unbearable. What did you do? This isn't your house, Loretta. You refused to sign the divorce papers. It's as much mine as it is yours, and I can do whatever I want with it. I called the police, she shot back. You'll have to pay to have it fixed and to drop the charges. Why don't you ask Raymond to fix it? He seems to handle things better than I do, I suggested, my patience wearing thin. He'd be happy to talk to you, especially since you got him fired too. I'll tell you what, Loretta. Next time I'm in town, I'll give him a call, I said. The conversation was becoming repetitive. I was glad everything had gone as planned but had no desire to continue talking to her. Without a word, I turned off my phone and hoped to get back to the lodge in time for breakfast. Everything had gone smoothly while I was away, except for one small problem, Caitlin. Where the hell is your father? I demanded upon my return. Hello John, welcome back, Caitlin replied calmly. Dad will only be gone for a couple of days. He had a little issue to resolve in Vegas. He needed to borrow some cash for the trip. He asked me to tell you not to worry. How much cash are we talking about? I asked. $10,000. Why on earth does he need $10,000? I'm not sure, Caitlin admitted. But I think it has something to do with my mother. And where's Terry? I asked, shifting the topic. In the kitchen, preparing for dinner, Caitlin said. Other than the fact that one of the partners took off with a large chunk of our operating capital, everything seems fine. Terry's busy but seems to have everything under control. He figured out it's easier to serve a small buffet every day than to allow guests to order from a menu. It's working well, and there haven't been any complaints. John, welcome back, Terry said as I entered the kitchen. How was your trip? It was actually a lot of fun. I'm glad I went. I heard Woody is gone. Yeah, Caitlin mentioned something about it, but she didn't know much, Terry said. Colleen's in trouble. She called Seymour, asking if he could reach Woody. It turns out Dennis took off after running up a hefty hotel bill. Colleen was arrested for defrauding the hotel owner. The bill was just under $10,000, and she's being held in the local jail until it's paid. She faces jail time if nothing is done soon. You're not saying Woody is going to use our money to pay off Colleen and Dennis's hotel bill, are you? I asked, a touch of disbelief in my voice. I don't think so, Terry said, with a hint of a smile as he left. He might have something up his sleeve. God, I hope so. We might need that money for the winter. Terry had bought a round-trip ticket and should return that evening. I turned to leave, remembering my visit to Dora. Terry, I saw Dora when I was at home. She's not doing well, I said. After what they did to us, I have no sympathy for her or the others, Terry replied tersely. I'm not sure, but things could have been different with Dora, I said. Differently how? A traitor is a traitor. You can't fix that, Terry retorted. Look, Loretta and Colleen might have pressured her into joining them. I don't think she wanted it but felt forced into it, I said. Is that what she told you? Not exactly. She wanted me to make sure you knew she didn't sleep with Carl, Terry said. She insisted I tell you that. So what the hell was she doing there? Terry asked, clearly frustrated. I didn't answer him. There was a brief pause before Terry began to put things together. Oh, don't tell me. He said, his voice trailing off. She said she felt like she had to do something. She insisted I tell you she didn't sleep with him. Apparently, Loretta and Colleen really pushed her. I could see that Terry was upset. I'm sorry, John, but as far as I'm concerned, what she did is just as bad as sleeping with him. She shouldn't have been there at all. I left him to his thoughts. I understood his frustration but wasn't sure how I would have reacted in his place. It only took a few more hours to finish my workday, and I needed to figure out how we could make money during the winter months. We closed the day with a sense of lingering uncertainty. Fishing season had arrived, but we needed a bit more to make it worthwhile. We were determined to avoid competing with the hunting camps and, with a unanimous decision, we ruled out any activities related to snowmobiles. My research on potential improvements was abruptly interrupted by the arrival of a new guest. Amanda F. walked in, and I have to admit, she was an intriguing presence. There was a certain charm about her that was hard to define. She was in her early 40s, with short, dark hair and a perpetually sun-kissed complexion. Although she wasn't conventionally beautiful, her posture and demeanor made her quite captivating. I couldn't help but think that my initial description sounded cheesy, but I quickly shook off that thought. "Are you the new owner?" she asked, her voice steady and composed. "Or one of them? How can I assist you?" "I can manage just fine on my own," she continued, a hint of a smirk playing on her lips. "I'm Amanda F. I've been coming here regularly for the past few years and I hope to keep it that way. I hope you haven't made too many changes because I'm not a fan of change. If there's anything you've altered that doesn't sit well with me, I'll let you know." "I assure you, I'll be happy to hear any feedback," I responded, trying to sound as accommodating as possible. Despite her teasing tone, I sensed a genuine intention behind her words. It was my job to ensure she had a pleasant stay, but I wasn't about to let her push me around. Luke Bureau, our dependable guide, was my go-to person for all things related to the guests. I inquired if he was still available. "Undoubtedly," I replied. "I'll be getting settled in for the rest of the day. Can you make sure Luke will be here in the morning?" "Certainly, Miss F.," I assured her. Luke was more than happy to fill me in on Amanda. For reasons unknown, she had a soft spot for him. He claimed that while she wasn't particularly talkative, she seemed to appreciate his silence. Her only interest was pike fishing, which struck Luke as odd. She hailed from Burlington, where there were plenty of lakes, so her decision to come here puzzled him. He wasn't sure, but he suspected she might be divorced. She had a son who had only joined her on one trip. Apparently, he wasn't fond of lake outings, which explained why he wasn't a regular presence. Amanda tipped generously and appeared to be one of Luke's favorite clients. Pike fishing, while not the most thrilling sport, was her passion. Despite its reputation for being somewhat mundane, hooking and landing a pike often felt like reeling in a heavy log. She practiced catch and release, never keeping any of the fish. There was something undeniably captivating about her, and I was looking forward to her stay. In the middle of the night, Woody returned. When I descended the stairs, he was halfway through his breakfast and greeted me with a satisfied grin. "Tell me the bad news, Woody. How much did your Vegas trip end up costing us?" I asked, bracing myself for the worst. Woody chuckled quietly as Caitlin poured me a cup of coffee. "Not a cent, buddy. Not a damn cent," he said, his mood surprisingly upbeat. "I didn't expect this," I replied, my curiosity piqued. "I thought you said it wouldn't cost us anything." "I paid for the ticket myself," Woody explained. "John, round-trip tickets to Las Vegas and excursions are pretty cheap. I took a lot of cash with me to flaunt in front of Colleen. It worked perfectly." "What worked?" I asked, puzzled. Woody finished his meal and pushed his plate aside. "They held Colleen until she could cover the hotel bill. She and that idiot didn't pay, so he bolted, and she was too clueless to figure out what was happening. Once she pays $9,700 plus court costs, she'll be released." I showed her the cash and promised to handle everything as soon as she signed the divorce papers. She signed them faster than I've ever seen. So you did spend money? I'm not that foolish, Woody said with a grin. I took the signed papers and walked straight out of the courthouse. It probably took her hours to realize I had tricked her as thoroughly as Dennis did. I mailed the signed documents to Seymour and hopped the next plane back to Montreal. You're a nasty piece of work, Woody, I said, shaking my head. I know, and I'm feeling great about it, Woody replied. As Caitlin came over to pour more coffee, I asked her to bring me something for breakfast. She mentioned it would take a bit longer because Terry had left. Caitlin was better in the kitchen than I was, so I helped out with waiting tables to give her a hand. Fortunately, the breakfast crowd thinned out within a few hours. I tidied up the kitchen while Caitlin handled the rest of the housework. The buffet lunch was more relaxed, and it was easier to serve food than wait tables. Caitlin again did an excellent job with the meal, but it was clear we needed additional help. After lunch, Luc Bourreau was waiting for me in my office. This wasn't a good sign. I didn't want to lose him as a guide. Mr. Mercer, I just need a minute of your time, Luc began. Is something wrong, Luc? I asked, my concern growing. If there's an issue, I'll do everything I can to address it. Woody and I had been at the lodge for a few days when Amanda's curiosity started to raise some concerns. She was asking an unusual number of questions, especially about me and why I had bought the lodge. Her inquiries also extended to my background and my wife, which made me uneasy. Luc, our staff member, had mentioned Amanda's questions, and he was clearly uncomfortable with the situation. He seemed frustrated because he couldn't provide satisfactory answers, and his discomfort was evident. I thanked Luc for his input and he left, seeming relieved. Woody had taken charge of dinner that evening, setting up several grills on the front porch for a cook-your-own-steak event. The cool, breezy weather was a bit chilly, but the guests seemed to enjoy the casual, outdoor dining experience. Woody and Caitlin were clearing the table, and I noticed Amanda sitting by the fireplace with a glass of red wine. Despite the fact that it wasn't particularly cold, the fire in the small fireplace added a cozy touch to the scene. I approached her and asked if I could join her. She silently moved over on the couch to make room, which I took as a good sign. I had no particular agenda, but I figured it was time to address the elephant in the room. Did Luc come to see you? I asked, trying to gauge her reaction. She seemed to expect this question and responded that she hadn't mentioned our meeting to him, but she had given him some hints. Amanda then inquired about my own situation, and we both seemed to relax as the conversation continued. I poured us both another glass of wine, and she asked if I had any questions for her. I suggested a quid pro quo: she could ask me questions, and I would answer them in exchange for my own questions. She agreed, and the conversation took on a more personal tone. I learned that she was married, or rather, in the process of divorcing. She was surprisingly candid about her situation, which made me feel more at ease. When it was my turn to answer, I shared that I had been divorced for 9 years and had an 18-year-old son. Amanda, in turn, revealed that she had 2 daughters who were now married and living independently. Our conversation flowed naturally for over an hour, and we ended up opening another bottle of wine. Amanda eventually apologized for the long conversation, mentioning that Luc was waiting for her and she was always punctual. I looked forward to spending more time with her in the days to come. The next morning brought a surprise. Dora, who had previously been a guest, was now working as our waitress. Woody and I exchanged knowing smiles but kept our remarks to ourselves, choosing to act as if everything was perfectly normal. Dora caught my eye and silently mouthed a thank you, which I acknowledged with a nod. Later that morning, Seymour called with an update on the divorce. Loretta had agreed to sign the papers but only on the condition that she be absolved of all responsibilities related to the house, making me the sole owner. Despite the house being in a state of disrepair, it still had strong potential. I told Seymour to proceed with Loretta's request. It was intriguing to see how Loretta was willing to walk away without claiming any assets. Although she was aware of only a fraction of what was at stake, Her decision to leave without demanding anything was unexpected. Terry, who had popped his head into the office, gave me a knowing wink before retreating. Despite the complexities, it felt good to see that some of our more mischievous schemes had positive outcomes. Amanda had taken a break from fishing for the day and was spending time in the main lodge with Caitlin. I made it a point to check in with them periodically, trying to understand the dynamics at play. Caitlin seemed occasionally flustered by Amanda's presence, indicating some form of disagreement, yet Amanda didn't leave. My own concentration was shot for the rest of the day. I was eager to catch up with Terry to figure out what had brought him and Dora back together and hoped to have a word with Luke about whether Mrs. Freeze had mentioned anything during her morning fishing trip. The tension between Amanda and Caitlin was palpable, and I was itching to call Loretta to vent and perhaps enjoy a bit of quiet gloating. I was certain Dora would want to speak with me, but she was being unusually reserved. Frustration mounted as I realized I was becoming overwhelmed with tasks and inquiries. Just as I was about to lose myself in the absurdity of the situation, Woody walked in with a couple of cold beers, shattering my brooding mood. Terry was still grumbling about how we'd used up all the steaks, messing up his menu for the week. The beers were a welcome relief, and Woody and I decided not to press Terry about his situation with Dora. When he was ready to talk, he would. Soon after Woody left, Luke stopped by to let me know that Mrs. Freeze had been in great spirits that morning. She caught some fish but didn't seem perturbed by it. As he left, Luke gave me a knowing smile and winked, which left me puzzled but curious about what it might mean. Amanda always dined alone, and while I generally avoided casual interactions with guests, I decided tonight was the night to engage with the intriguing woman. "May I join you?" I asked, approaching her table. "Certainly," Amanda replied, gesturing to the empty chair. "I haven't ordered yet." "So, you didn't venture out this afternoon?" I inquired. "No," she said. "I wanted to talk to Caitlin. I should have sought her father's permission first, but I hoped it would go smoothly." "How did that go?" I asked. "Not too well, I'm afraid," Amanda admitted. "I couldn't explain things as clearly as I wanted to. I just hope I didn't mess things up too much." Dora came by to take our dinner order. We chose from one of 3 entrees, and the rest of the meal was prepared in advance. Terry had a knack for simplifying things. "What exactly were you trying to achieve?" I asked Amanda, curious. "I mentioned last night that I have a son," she began. "Jason is very intelligent, good-looking, and physically healthy, but he has a significant issue. Since childhood, he's been mentally abused by his father. Despite his accomplishments, his father was never satisfied. The constant belittling eroded his self-respect and confidence. He stutters and avoids interactions with both adults and peers. I believe that was a major factor in our divorce." "That's tragic," I said sympathetically. "Absolutely," Amanda continued. "I also have a restraining order that prevents his father from contacting him, even once Jason is of legal age. I have excellent lawyers handling it." The conversation paused briefly as Dora served our food. Luke had mentioned that Jason had once visited the lodge with Amanda, and I wanted to know more. "Yes, I hoped the lodge would help him relax," Amanda explained. "But he detested the lake and fishing. Since then, whenever I visit, he stays with my sister. It's not ideal, but I don't want him to become overly dependent on me. At some point, he needs to learn to be independent. I've tried to stay away longer each time to prepare him, but leaving him with my sister hasn't been very effective." "I understand," I said. "But why Caitlin?" "She's around Jason's age, and she seems well-adjusted and confident. She works hard, and people seem to like her." "Exactly," Amanda replied. "I thought Caitlin might be able to spend some one-on-one time with Jason. I was hoping that bringing him here for a few weeks might help him open up. He's scheduled to start at Princeton in 6 weeks, and in his current state, he won't be ready. I've spent thousands on therapists, but it's been largely ineffective. I need to try something different. I noticed Caitlin didn't seem too enthusiastic about the idea, I said. She promised to consider it, but it doesn't look promising. Would you be willing to speak with Woody on my behalf? Amanda asked. I was hoping you could help me with this. Why me? I asked, surprised. You're good at reading people, Amanda explained. Unfortunately, I allowed my father to choose my husband, and I won't make that mistake again. I believe you might be able to convince Caitlin to help. I'll see what I can do, I said. Will you have dessert? I will, if you join me, Amanda replied. I found Caitlin and Woody and relayed the request to Woody. It seemed like the right move to help Amanda and, potentially, Jason. The porch was cool but had an inviting charm as Caitlin and I waited for Woody to join us. As I sipped my coffee, Caitlin spoke up, "Can I interrupt for a moment?" "Certainly," I replied, settling into my chair. Caitlin and Woody had been discussing dinner, and Caitlin continued, "Your beautiful daughter became the main topic of our dinner conversation. I must admit, it's what we anticipated." Woody, who had become like an uncle to Caitlin over the years, seemed to bristle at her words. "She made me quite angry," Caitlin said. "I'm confused about whether she sees me as someone to look after her children or if she views me as an easy companion. I've been called Uncle John for years, but it seems to have stuck." Woody looked concerned. "There's a big difference between those two roles," he said. Caitlin's response was candid. "Well, I'm not happy with either of those options. Did she present it that way to you, or is this your own interpretation?" "She didn't spell it out exactly," Caitlin replied, "but I assumed that's what she was implying. Either way, I have no intention of spending my time being a glorified babysitter or dealing with a demanding person." Woody appeared somewhat frustrated by his daughter's bluntness. "I understand your frustration, Caitlin. It sounds like she's been a bit inconsiderate." "I don't know how else to describe it," Caitlin said, and Mrs. Freeze tried to explain the situation to me, but I wasn't really paying attention. My thoughts were all over the place. Woody tried to refocus the conversation. "Caitlin, he's going to Princeton in a few months. He's not foolish or mentally deficient, in fact, he's quite bright." Caitlin paced back and forth on the porch, visibly upset. "No, it's still not right. She even offered me money to take care of her son. I'm not a nanny, and I'm certainly not someone you can just pay to spend time with your child." I smiled at her audacity. "Here's a thought, why don't you tell her you'll do it for free? That way, your reputation stays intact." Caitlin raised an eyebrow. "What reputation? I don't care what others think, I need to be okay with myself." Woody chuckled softly, appreciating Caitlin's attempt to assert herself. "That makes sense, Caitlin. But it seems like there's a practical solution to this." He suggested, "Dora can handle all the kitchen and dining room duties, and Jason can help with the housework in the mornings. That way, you'll have the second half of the day free." Caitlin looked at Woody skeptically. "What should I do with him then? Run around the forest naked and make love?" Woody tried to keep a straight face but couldn't help smirking. It was just a playful suggestion. "But if you're open to it, it might not be such a bad idea." "Dad, stop it. This is serious, and you and John are making it into a joke," Caitlin exclaimed, sitting down on the bench between us. "Okay, I'll agree to help for 2 weeks, but only if it's on those terms." Woody gave her a hug, clearly proud of her decision. We all stood up and headed back inside. Caitlin, with a hint of frustration, asked, "Dad, why can't I get into Princeton?" Woody groaned and shook his head. "Let's talk about it later." That evening, Amanda and I enjoyed coffee in front of the fireplace. She seemed content with the way things were progressing and decided to extend her stay at the lodge to coincide with her son's visit. I voiced my reservations about her idea, but we eventually reached a compromise. I promised to entertain her if she promised to leave Caitlin and Jason alone. Amanda found the idea amusing and wanted to know more about what I had in mind. I hadn't yet discussed with Terry or Dora why Amanda was at the lodge. I decided to wait until they were ready to talk. Later that night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. My mind kept circling back to one pressing question: why hadn't Loretta tried to claim any of the money from the bank? Why had she settled so quickly? What was I missing? The next morning, as I went downstairs for breakfast, I found Amanda already by the water. Woody and I had blueberry pancakes but didn't linger over idle conversation. Woody had repairs to make on 2 outboard motors, and I had bills to address. I called Seymour later that morning. "Seymour, I'm concerned about the damage control. I'm just as worried as you are, but I didn't want to complicate things further. Getting Loretta to sign the papers was a priority, but I brought in one of my girls to assist with the process." Seymour seemed to hesitate. "Do you recall when Loretta's father passed away?" "It was about 6 years ago. Loretta lost both her parents within 2 years. Her father had a life insurance policy for $100,000. "I wasn't aware of that," I said, surprised. "She never mentioned it at all." Seymour continued, "That's the issue. There are still details to uncover. We need to be cautious and thorough to understand the full picture." As I processed this new information, I realized that there was more to the situation than I had initially thought. Loretta had moved her insurance funds to a money market account at Berkshire Credit Union, using her maiden name. The shock of this revelation hit hard. "You've got to be kidding me. Why on earth would she do that?" I asked incredulously. "John may never find out unless she decides to tell him herself," came the reply. "It seems she didn't want to risk any of her marital property being entangled with her insurance funds." "But Ray Upright only came to town last year. He had no involvement in this," I protested. "That's true," the voice on the other end of the line continued. "But there's something else. Ray Upright has a wife and 2 children living in Colorado Springs. As far as we can tell, Loretta had no idea." I couldn't help but laugh, even though it was a grim situation. "I'm sorry, Seymour, but this is just too rich. Loretta gave up everything for a man who was married, and she didn't even know it." "It seems so," Seymour said. "And it's only getting more tangled. Loretta cashed out the account yesterday and walked away with a check for $124,000. It looks like she's planning to leave town." "All we can do now is wait and see," I said, relieved that at least I was no longer at risk. "I guess you're out of danger now." After hanging up, I sat quietly, chuckling to myself, when Dora walked in. "John, I just wanted to thank you for talking to Terry. I really appreciate it," she said, her eyes fixed on the floor. "Everything is fine. Almost. It's not the same as it was, but it's much better than it could have been." I nodded, trying to offer reassurance. "Dora, I think he really loves you. I'm glad things are improving." There was a brief pause before she looked up, her eyes moist. "Everything is fine, John, but it's not back to normal. Maybe someday, but not yet. I can wait." Her words were heavy, and I could see the sadness in her eyes. "What does that mean?" I asked gently. Tears began to well up as she continued, "He doesn't kiss me, John. My husband refuses to kiss me. We do everything else, but he can't bring himself to touch my lips. It hurts, but I think I deserve it." Dora's sobs filled the room as she left, and I was left at a loss for words. Later that day, Jason arrived, and he was strikingly handsome, carrying himself with a certain poise that belied the social ineptitude his mother described. Caitlin's face lit up when she saw him, and I could tell he wasn't quite what she had expected. The next 2 weeks promised to be eventful. Amanda made me join her on several fishing trips, which I didn't mind, except for the pike fishing. It felt monotonous, and distinguishing between a fish and the weeds was often a challenge. Luke found my struggles amusing, though he managed to keep his laughter in check. Eventually, Amanda stopped insisting on these trips and agreed to go on nature walks with me instead. Terry, Woody, and I were content with the way things were unfolding. We often met to discuss business, carefully avoiding any mention of Terry's relationship with Dora. Observing Caitlin and Jason was intriguing. Initially, their interactions were slow, but by the second day, there was noticeable progress. Woody and I finally cornered Caitlin and asked her directly about what was happening. "I don't think the problem is as severe as Mrs. Freeze makes it out to be," Caitlin began hesitantly. "He's just very shy, mainly because of his stutter. He struggles to speak properly and avoids social interactions, especially with girls. I suspect he was teased a lot when he was younger." Woody chuckled. "So, you're saying you expect it to take longer than 2 weeks?" Caitlin shot him a sharp look. "I didn't say that. Don't put words in my mouth. He'll only be here for a few weeks, and then he'll be gone. He's a good guy, and I don't see why everyone's making such a fuss." "Does he have a girlfriend?" Woody asked playfully. Caitlin's curiosity was evident. "Does he, Uncle John?" "It doesn't really matter," I replied. "But the answer is no. I don't think he's ever been on a date. His father's mental abuse and his mother's issues have left him quite isolated." Caitlin seemed to absorb this information, and I could tell the next few weeks would be pivotal for all involved. Woody and I exchanged glances as Caitlin stormed out of the room. "You didn't kiss him, did you, Dad?" Caitlin had asked with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "No, I didn't kiss him," Woody replied, shaking his head. "And I don't plan to. Maybe you could let this go now. We are managing just fine. Stop trying to complicate things with your lectures." With that, Caitlin left us alone, and Woody and I shared a brief, knowing smile. That evening, Amanda and I had dinner together. She seemed genuinely pleased with how Caitlin and Jason were getting along. It was clear that Amanda had come to realize that her overprotectiveness might have been part of the problem. It was refreshing to see her preparing to let Jason navigate some things on his own. Amanda, ever the tease, chided me for not fulfilling my promise to keep her occupied. She felt I wasn't doing enough to meet our agreement. Despite her playful reproach, things were progressing smoothly at the lodge. Our guests were happy, and though the profit was modest, it was a start. We had reached out to several local ice hut operators, and they were eager to set up their facilities on our lake. With the ability to run these operations for about 10 weeks, it provided a useful way to cover a period of otherwise low activity. Additionally, the area was home to several birdwatching organizations, which gave us the opportunity to create birding trails on our property. We decided that maintaining the property during the fall hunting season would be more practical than inviting guests to roam through the woods. I spent nearly every evening with Amanda, and it had become a comfortable routine for both of us. Around 10 days after Jason's arrival, Woody and I were in for a surprise. Caitlin had a meeting with Amanda to update her on Jason's progress. According to Amanda, things were going better than expected. After their conversation, Caitlin asked Amanda if she could get her some pills. Mrs. Freeze wasn't prepared for this request but agreed to help. However, after Caitlin left, Amanda reconsidered and sought Woody's approval before following through. Woody and I found ourselves in an unusual predicament. Amanda was ready to comply with Caitlin's request but was hesitant without Woody's consent. This was a situation that ideally shouldn't fall on a father's shoulders, but it was clear that Amanda needed Woody's backing to proceed. After some anxious deliberation, Woody reluctantly agreed, recognizing that it was in everyone's best interest. It was clear that Caitlin had formed a genuine connection with Jason, perhaps stronger than any of us had anticipated. The following morning, as I was finishing breakfast, I received an unexpected call from Loretta. "John, I need your help," she began, her voice strained. "When I signed the divorce papers, I didn't ask for anything. Well, in terms of money. I was taken aback. I thought you had enough funds. What's going on?" Loretta sounded distressed. I'm in a tough spot right now and was hoping you could lend me a few thousand. I was puzzled. I thought you had a good amount from the life insurance. What happened? There was a heavy pause before she answered. John, I feel so ashamed. I did something incredibly foolish. Raymond and I opened a joint account with a cashier's check from the credit union. I sighed, bracing myself for the inevitable. Let me guess, Raymond skipped town with the money? Yes, Loretta said, her voice breaking. I don't know where he is or where he might have gone. I suspect he's headed to Colorado Springs to be with his family. A long silence followed. He's married with children? I asked, incredulous. Yes, and I should have told you. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize how urgent this was. I could hear the tears in her voice. Enough of this. Come see Seymour tomorrow. I'll call him and arrange for him to give you $5,000. It should help until you can get to Colorado and find a lawyer. Loretta's relief was palpable. Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. That was the last time I spoke with her, but the weight of the situation lingered heavily. To Loretta, my initial instinct was to say she didn't deserve anything, and maybe a lot of guys would agree. She had made such a mess of things that it was hard to feel anything but frustration. But despite everything, I found myself feeling a bit of sympathy for her. Jason had been staying at the lodge for over a month, and the time was approaching for him to leave. Caitlin had been spending all her time with him, practically ignoring Woody and me. We joked about it, almost like Caitlin was getting Jason ready for his big debut in our lodge community. We had all been briefly introduced to him, but apart from Caitlin, none of us had really spent any time with him. One afternoon, Woody and I noticed Caitlin and Jason in the small library and reading room at one end of the main hall. They were there with Amanda Fries, and it didn't look like a casual hangout. They were dressed far more formally than usual, suggesting it was a significant meeting. Amanda glanced up, noticed us, and offered a small, knowing smile. After about an hour, Caitlin and Jason approached us, both with broad smiles. Now it's your turn, Daddy, Caitlin said with a playful grin. Mrs. Fries wants to talk to you and Uncle John. Woody and I exchanged glances, feeling like kids summoned to the principal's office, and walked over to Amanda. It turned out Amanda Fries was far wealthier than we had ever imagined. We knew she had money, but we hadn't realized she was in a different league altogether. Her father had made substantial donations to Princeton University, so Amanda had plenty of leverage to get whatever she wanted. All that was left was to get Elwood F. Perry's approval for his daughter to attend Princeton in less than 2 weeks. Woody thought it would be a formality. Later, Terry joined Woody and me at the porch. It was too chilly for beer, but we drank it anyway, trying to figure out if Caitlin genuinely liked Jason or if she was merely playing along to secure a college ride. We didn't dwell on it too long. Terry still avoided discussing Dora, and Woody and I knew that topic was off limits. That evening, Amanda joined me in front of the fireplace with some popcorn. Although microwave popcorn was a staple, making it over an open fire was more fun and added a nice burnt crispiness. I had never thought of pairing popcorn with wine, but tonight felt special. It was the first night in a long time that I wasn't sleeping alone. We thought we were discreet, but Caitlin, who handled the morning chores, quickly noticed that Amanda's bed was now part of my room. At breakfast, Caitlin's sharp remarks were a reminder that we hadn't been as subtle as we'd hoped. Later that morning, Amanda moved her things into my room. Jason, who was usually very reserved, gave me a small, approving smile during lunch. I took it as a sign that he was okay with the arrangement. In the meantime, Weather Guard Recovery Enterprises agreed to repair the damaged house for $144,000 plus 5% of the resale profit. They specialized in storm and fire damage, and the deal was handled entirely online. I never saw the old house again but ended up making a profit of over $660,000. Sarah called to let me know that her mother had managed to recover almost all the money Raymond had taken from her. Loretta had left Colorado for Los Angeles, planning to stay with her cousin there. Amanda accompanied Jason and Caitlin to help them get settled into school. They had spent the last 2 weeks at the lodge, renting a cabin, so Woody had no issues letting them share the apartment while they attended school. Woody realized that pushing for anything more would only lead to disappointment. Before returning, Amanda stopped by her home in Burlington to collect clothes and personal items for her stay at the lodge. We all welcomed her decision to stay permanently, especially Dora, who was eager to have more female company. Amanda would take charge of all advertising and correspondence, handling tasks that would ensure the lodge's continued success. Luke's disappointment was evident when Amanda gave up her pike fishing obsession. Her once fervent passion had faded, and things settled into a quieter rhythm as fall progressed. With hunting season winding down, our lodge was one of the few places in the area untouched by hunters. This lull provided us with a much-needed opportunity to catch up on chores and get everything in order. Financially, we were stable. To celebrate the season, we held a modest Christmas party complete with a decorated tree and a few gifts. Amanda even hung up some mistletoe, and Dora's husband surprised her with a heartfelt kiss, a sweet moment that brought joy to the evening. Despite the festive atmosphere, Woody spent the holidays alone. He didn't seem to mind too much, though, as he never heard from Colleen again. My divorce had been finalized, but Amanda and I had never broached the subject of remarriage. We were content with how things were, and neither of us wanted to jeopardize the happiness we'd found. Jason and Caitlin's story took an unexpected turn. They didn't finish their first year at Princeton. Instead, after a whirlwind marriage in Maryland, Jason transferred to the University of Vermont, and the couple moved into the family home in Burlington. Amanda was thrilled with the arrival of her first grandchild, though it was evident her initial plans for Jason's future didn't quite pan out as expected. Reflecting on our experiences, I can't help but feel a sense of nostalgia. The journey had its ups and downs, but it was filled with moments of genuine camaraderie and support. To me, this story exemplifies what true friendship is all about, sticking together and helping one another, even through the most personal and challenging situations like dealing with infidelity. What do you think about our story? In my opinion, it highlights the strength of friendship and the importance of standing by each other. Share your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, stay tuned for more videos.